If the House votes to impeach President Trump, it'll be up to the Senate to decide if they should remove him from office. And that means that 6 Democratic presidential candidates would be on the jury that determines the president's future in office. And that could also mean that they could be stuck in Washington before the Iowa caucuses and the New Hampshire primary, a crucial time in the 2020 campaign. According to the New York Times, Republican senators are divided over whether to embrace a lengthy trial that could keep their Democratic counterparts off the campaign trail. One of those candidates is Senator of Colorado, Michael Bennet, who joins me now on set. Thank you so much, Senator, for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's great to see you again.
Absolutely. So, you've pledged to stay into this campaign through February 11th, which is when the New Hampshire primary would be, at least is what you've said. What would you say if this ends up going to the Senate? How would you deal with that?
Well, we're going to have to deal with it. We have a constitutional responsibility to sit as the jurors in this trial, and I know I and my colleagues will fulfill that constitutional responsibility. So it's going to be inconvenient, but there's so much you can do now with social media and with the telephone just to stay in touch with people in Iowa and New Hampshire, and I'm sure we'll all do that.
Right now, it appears that Republican senators are standing tall with the president on this. What do you think it would take?
I wouldn't say standing tall. I would say standing firm.
Standing firm is probably a better choice of words. Fair enough. That point taken. Right now, at this point, what do you think it would take for your fellow Republican senators to change their mind?
I don't know. It's a very interesting question, and it's going to be in full view of the American people. I mean, it's hard to imagine them defending this kind of conduct for any other president. I mean, it's hard to imagine them defending Barack Obama if he had done one of the things that Donald Trump is now accused of doing. So we're going to have to see as time goes on. I hope that what will happen is that they will decide that they've been sent there to defend the Constitution, not one person who thinks that he's above the law, the President of the United States, and that they'll do the right thing.
It takes 2/3 of the Senate to remove the president. And if all the Democrats stay on board, that would take 20 more Republicans. Do you really see that happening?
I think it's highly unlikely. I think it's highly unlikely, but we have to go through this process. The president brought it on himself. I think Nancy Pelosi waited as long as she could, and when you got a president basically admitting to extorting a foreign power over trying to get them to investigate his political rivals, we've got a problem on our hands. She couldn't just ignore that, nor could we in the Senate ignore it. I do hope what happens now, though, is that this is an opportunity for us to remind the American people about why the rule of law is so important. I remember during Watergate, you won't remember that, but I remember. It was a very dark time in American history. The Vietnam War was going on. Nixon had done what Nixon did. And by the end of it, the democracy had actually won again. And I hope that's what we're going to see here.
Because I wasn't there during Nixon, I've been reading up and talking to historians. And one thing that one historian told me was Republicans tend to resurge, right? After Watergate, you had Reagan. After Clinton, you look at the surge after that.
Yeah.
Are you concerned for your party if this does go to an impeachment hearing in the Senate?
Well, I'm more concerned for my party that we run on an agenda that can unite not just Democrats, but the 9 million people who voted twice for Barack Obama and once for Donald Trump. We've got to have an agenda that does that. I think I've proposed one in this race that would meet that test, and I'm very worried that there are candidates running on an agenda that can't even unify the Democratic Party. So I'm actually more worried about that than I am about the impeachment.
Your current polling shows you less than 1% for the nomination, and you haven't qualified for a debate since July. What makes you really think that you could potentially secure this nomination?
Well, I don't think the debates have made any difference in the race at all. I wish that I'd been on the debate stage. There's some things I would have liked to have said. But what makes me think we have the opportunity is we're adding people in New Hampshire. I took over Kamala Harris's office there just last week. And I said to some folks last week that the good news is we're tied with Kamala Harris and we're tied with Cory Booker. The bad news is we're all at 1%. But this is a long way to go. New Hampshire has not made up its mind. I am the only candidate in this race who's won 2 national elections in a swing state. Nobody else has done it. No one else is running on an agenda that can unify the American people in the way that the agenda that I'm running on can. And I don't think there's anybody who's more capable of beating Donald Trump than I am. So I am going to stay in the race and continue to make my case in these early states, and we'll have to see what happens.
What's the one thing you could do that would unify this country?
The one thing that we could do to unify this country is put our children ahead of our own interests. If we asked ourselves every day, is what we're doing more or less likely to improve the fortune of our children? That would unify us. And today we're ignoring that question. And I think that runs the risk of my generation being the first generation of Americans to leave less opportunity, not more, to the people coming after us. And that would be a shame, particularly because we don't have to do that. You know, we can reconstruct our politics so that we can overcome a broken Washington and deliver for the next generation. And I think one way or another, we're going to figure out how to do it. But as long as Donald Trump is in the White House, who really doesn't care about, the next generation, we're not going to do it.
Michael Bloomberg may potentially throw his hat in the ring. Can't imagine this getting any wider than this. If he does, why do you believe that you would be better than Michael Bloomberg?
Well, I think it's a reflection of the uncertainty of the race that he's talking about getting in. I've won 2 statewide elections in the purple state of Colorado. I think that's a very different calling card than having been mayor of New York. And I've also spent 10 years in the Senate, which is long enough to figure out how to get some things done, but also how to understand why the most important things like climate change and like income inequality are never addressed. So I think I've got a little bit of a head start based on that experience.
What would you say your personal benchmark would be to determine whether you drop out?
I said at the very beginning, when I got in this race, I wouldn't have gotten in if I didn't think that I could win. And I think that if I get to a point where I think I can't win, I won't keep going with the race. But I have not reached that point, and I don't expect to reach that point anytime soon.
You've said that a candidate who supports Medicare for all would not go on to win the presidency. If you see a Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren ending up securing the Democratic nomination, would you support them?
Obviously, I would do anything to support them. I think I would support any of 330 million Americans over Donald Trump. I think he's the worst president that we've had in my lifetime and the least patriotic president that we've had in my lifetime. I just think Democrats will make it harder for ourselves if we nominate a candidate who's for Medicare for all, a plan that only 30% of Democrats support, much less the rest of the country. And
you would support them even if there was a center candidate who ran third party or independent? You would still support the Democratic?
I would support the Democrat. But look, we have to, and I think it would be bad to have a third party candidate, and that might assure the election of Donald Trump. And when you look at what's happening out, I know you've been a foreign correspondent, nothing could make Russia happier than having Donald Trump reelected. Nothing could make China happier than having Donald Trump reelected. Nothing could make Iran happier than having Donald Trump reelected, because as long as he's there, the weak and ignorant foreign policy president that we have, they can do whatever they want, and we're not pushing back on them at all. And so I think it's critical for America to come together and say that was an interesting chapter. But we know what happens now when we blow the place up, and the place was blown up by our election of Donald Trump. Now what are we going to do for our kids and our grandkids, and what are we going to do, really importantly, for America's place in the world? Because we are seeing right now what is happening when there's a vacuum of U.S. leadership in the world, and it is not pretty.
Senator Michael Bennet, grateful you could join us here
Thanks
at CBSN.
for having me.